Time to revise. It's going to be paper 3. We're going to look at cognition and development today, and we're going to focus on mirror neurons. Let's do it. There you go, exam style questions with timings, everything you need to do some active revision. So here's your chance to pause the video, give it a go, whether that's planning or doing under time conditions or talking through with a friend. Do something active with it, come back, play the video when you're ready for me to talk through. Okay. Right, social cognition. I'm not sure this exact question has ever come up before, but social cognition is obviously named on the spec, and it encompasses perspective taking, theory of mind, and the mirror neuron system. So they could well ask you to explain what that means. I would just, for 1 or 2 marks, just say something along the lines of, it's about the link between our thinking and our social behaviour. So you could say that it's about how we understand other people, how we relate to other people, and you could even mention that it includes skills like theory of mind and perspective taking. Okay, what is a mirror neuron? Hopefully a straightforward enough question. It would be part of a knowledge in a bigger question or an essay anyway, so we do need to get to grips with what a mirror neuron is. Well, a mirror neuron is a cell that fires both when we observe and when we perform an action. Yeah? So the brain activation is the same whether we're doing it or whether we're watching it. Okay, that's probably enough to just explain what a mirror neuron is. I suppose you could elaborate with, mirror neurons are linked to understanding other people, they're linked to empathy, they're linked to action understanding or intention understanding, but really the focus is on what is it, like biologically what it's doing. Yeah, so it's a cell that shows the same activity, it fires both when we observe and when we perform a behaviour, and therefore reflects others' actions or behaviours onto ourselves. That's the link with empathy. That's why it's called a mirror neuron, isn't it? Okay, so application, we've got Kevin who's got an autism diagnosis. He struggles to understand what other people are thinking and feeling, as is very common with the condition, of course. Right, so you don't particularly have to know about autism to tackle this question. I know that autism comes up a lot with theory of mind. I don't see why you couldn't make a link with mirror neurons as well, so I've gone for a question like this. Because what you need to know about the mirror neuron system is, as I alluded to a minute ago, it's linked to things like understanding other people, isn't it? About intentions and perspective taking and theory of mind and empathy and all of that, okay? So we're going to, for 4 marks here, maybe 2 knowledge, 2 application, we're going to explain what the mirror neuron system is and the fact that it's been tied to empathy because it allows us to understand or even to kind of experience other people's thoughts and emotions, yeah? Because those mirror neurons are the same in terms of activity when we see someone else have a feeling as when we do it, that's where that link is. That's allowing us to empathise, yeah? So you could say that maybe abnormal mirror neuron activity or maybe a damaged mirror neuron system might account for Kevin's difficulties because this is the behaviour they're responsible for, yeah? Like we said, empathy, understanding other people, okay? Right, again, I haven't seen a question quite like this one in the past, but I don't see why they couldn't ask it, so I've gone for it. So explain one way in which scientists have investigated the role of the mirror neuron system in social cognition, and explain one limitation. So probably going to be a 2 plus 2 here, isn't it? So how have scientists investigated it? So that's more about the procedure. There are no key studies, but you should have looked at research as part of your studies, even if it's from the evaluation, okay? Now you could go down the route of saying that scientists have compared groups of participants with autism with groups of participants without an autism diagnosis as a control group, and found that maybe there's abnormal mirror neuron activity in the autism group, which again would suggest that it's linked to empathy and things like that. But it's more about the how have they done it. So you could say that maybe that's an fMRI study, and they're comparing a group of participants with autism with a control group, yeah, in terms of a method, yeah. You could talk about studies, again, there's a lot of fMRI and EEG studies, isn't there? But you could talk about specific behaviour that scientists have studied. So you might be aware of the study by Marco Iacoboni et al., where they looked at whether people could understand or follow people's intentions by showing them some photographs of, or some video clips, of different activities. And I think there's ones where they've got kind of like teapots and things arranged or jugs arranged on a table, and whether people kind of follow, are they trying to pick up the cup, are they trying to drink from it, are they trying to put it back, that sort of thing. Okay, so you could talk about a specific study if you're aware of one, or it could be a slightly more general comment, but it's about the how. So when we then come to deal with the second part of the question, we need to explain a limitation. Now, I'd be tempted to, it depends what you've just outlined, doesn't it? But if you've outlined one that is talking about maybe EEG or fMRI, I'd be tempted to go down that route and use what you know about biopsychology. Okay. So if you've outlined a study that maybe mentions fMRI, you could talk about the fact that fMRI doesn't actually measure electrical activity, it only measures blood oxygenation. Make sure this doesn't become generic, make sure you link it to mirror neurons, yeah? This is a problem because mirror neurons are activating electrically, not through blood oxygenation, and therefore we're making an inference about the role of mirror neurons in social cognition, which might not actually be true, yeah? Similarly for EEG, mirror neurons are individual cells. Now EEG, because the size of the electrodes and how the thing works, it doesn't pick up activity from individual neurons. So again, it lacks validity for investigating mirror neurons. Yeah? So I think there's a couple of good points you can make there. 8 marker. Outline and evaluate the role of mirror neurons in social cognition. Okay, fine. Fairly straightforward, covering both skills of knowledge and evaluation there. Okay, so we're going to outline what mirror neurons are. We said that already. It's about a cell that is active or has the same activity, whether we are observing or performing an action. Brilliant. But it's about the role of mirror neurons in social cognition. So your extra knowledge marks there are going to come from what kind of behaviours are they linked to. So talking about, their link with imitation or understanding intentions or theory of mind or empathy or language acquisition, whatever it might be, yeah? So pick a couple of behaviours, talk about their role in those. In terms of some evaluation, probably go down the route of 2 evaluation paragraphs for this 8 marker, maybe a strength, research support, but then countering that to give it a bit of discussion with the fact that maybe it's undermined because it's brain scanning and, we've just talked about that, so I'm not going to go through it all again. That would be good. You could then talk about maybe a strength of the role of the mirror neuron system is maybe it's a good explanation in terms of trying to understand autism. Yeah, and you could bring in maybe research that shows there's a difference in mirror neuron activity between a group of autism patients, that's the wrong word, I'm sorry, participants with autism and a control group of participants. Yeah, and the fact that that strengthens the role of the mirror neuron systems, it means it's useful, it's got real world application to explaining or understanding autism. And again, if you wanted to, you go further and you could discuss that and you could counter-argue with the idea that actually not all studies have shown that people with autism have different mirror neuron activity to control or neurotypical individuals, and therefore maybe it's not a complete or not even a valid explanation of autism. All right, so I think there's loads of stuff you could do there. But for an 8 marker, knowledge paragraph, and then I would do 2 evaluation paragraphs. Then we come to the 16 marker, so discuss the role of the mirror neuron system. So that is basically a just straightforward 16 marker outlining and evaluating it. But we need to make a reference to either theory of mind or Selman's levels of perspective taking in this response. Now, important word or there. So what will probably happen if you try to do both is they will just look at your links to both and only credit whichever is more effective. So don't waste your time, okay? Look out for things like that. So outlining the role of the mirror neuron system, 6 knowledge marks. Again, we're going to start by explaining what the mirror neuron system is. We're going to talk about maybe 3 or 4 different behaviours that it's linked to. Okay? So you could, if you wanted to, but you wouldn't be required to, but you could talk about maybe some of the ideas about where these things are, in terms of, you might be aware of the pars opercularis, you might be able to say that it's maybe, regions in the motor cortex where they've been discovered or linked to. But as I said, you don't have to. There are lots of different locations where they've been found. You could, if you wanted to, you could talk about their discovery. That's not specifically on the spec. I don't think it's ever even been asked as a specific question, but you could. I think that's probably, something that I might do if I've kind of run out and I think I need a bit more knowledge, and maybe have that as a backup, but the rest of it is more important. So what are mirror neurons and what are they doing? What behaviours have they been linked to? Okay, in the discussion, so your AO3 marks now, I've already talked through some ideas, so you could do research support from maybe fMRI studies or EEG studies and then counter-argue that. Yeah, discussion, bit of 2 sides there. You've got the maybe real-world application or the utility of research into mirror neurons as maybe an explanation for autism, and then the counter-argument, we've already been through that. But that is a good point to bring in maybe theory of mind, because you know theory of mind is also an explanation for autism. Yeah, so you could link that in, and you could maybe mention Baron Cohen's research, and the fact that maybe even could develop this a bit further. Maybe even the theory of mind is actually underpinned by the mirror neurons, and putting both of those together is a bit more of a higher level or even more holistic or interactionist kind of explanation, because the theory of mind is the psychological, the cognitive bit, and underpinning that we've got the biology of the mirror neuron system. So maybe we need to take both of those things together. Yeah, that might be a nice discussion to have. Okay, maybe you'd want one more point. Maybe that might well be enough depending on how much you developed it. But if you wanted another point, you could maybe have a discussion about whether mirror neurons have been overhyped or oversold. I know there's a lot of discussion about this out there and in some of the textbooks. So you might bring in maybe the arguments of, I'm sure you're aware of Ramachandran and his arguments about how mirror neuron system is going to be this massive thing that it's defined civilization. It's how we've evolved. It's going to be this massive thing that's going to revolutionize psychology. And actually the research seems to have kind of petered off a bit, and it hasn't really done what was promised. So you could have, as I said, a discussion about, have they been overhyped? Are they actually that valuable? Or are they just cells that are, recording activity and then relaying it somewhere else to other bits of the brain that are actually more important than the mirror neurons themselves? Yeah, so you could have a discussion about that. There's also research, depending on which book you use, there's also research about gender differences in the mirror neuron system, and you could link that to the idea that females generally are a bit more socially competent or a bit more kind of empathetic and socially sensitive, and maybe that's linking to this difference in mirror neuron activity that some research has found. But anyway, break it down again quickly. 6 knowledge marks, 10 evaluation marks, and in there we're going to make a reference to one of these alternatives. I would suggest, as I said, that might be theory of mind, because it links better to autism if you're having a discussion about that. All right. Okay, how did that go for you? Time to reflect. Why did it go that way? And what are you going to do next? Right, that was me discussing the mirror neuron system. I know not everybody likes cognition and development, and not everybody likes the mirror neuron system, but I do. I think it's pretty good. Alright, hope that went okay for you, hope that was useful. Keep at it. See you in another video. Bish bash bosh.